The Thames rolled sluggishly beneath the leaden sky, its waters carrying the weight of centuries of blood and judgment. Along its banks at Wapping, the British Empire staged its most chilling ritual of power. The executions at the infamous execution dock. Gallows rose stark against the horizon, a wooden scaffold where pirates met their end, not with mercy, but with slow, strangling death. Crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder, drawn not by compassion, but by spectacle. They came to jeer, to gape, to feel the thrill of righteousness as another body kicked against the rope. Among those condemned were women. Their numbers were small, but their presence on the scaffold unsettled society far more than the deaths of men. For piracy was already condemned as a capital crime, but when a woman committed it, it was branded unnatural, a violation of the order that men believed governed the world. To pick up a pistol, to curse like a sailor, to fight beside men in the smoke of battle, this was not merely unlawful, it was monstrous. And so, when women were brought to trial in the courts of the Admiralty, they were judged twice, once for their crimes against empire, and again for daring to be women who refused submission. This is their story, a tale of courtrooms where verdicts were decided long before the trial began, of punishments designed to humiliate and terrify, of hangings that turned flesh into symbols, and of legends that, despite the gallows, refused to die. The golden age of piracy, from the mid-17th to the early 18th century, was less an age of glory than an age of chaos. Empires battled for supremacy, their navies stretched thin, and across the Atlantic and Caribbean, the sea lanes groaned with treasure ships, slave vessels, and convoys bound for Europe. Where wealth moved, danger followed. Pirates rose from the wreckage of war, seizing prizes with audacity, striking ports with fire, and carving out their own lawless republics. For men, piracy was crime enough. The Piracy Act of 1698 declared without hesitation that all and every person so offending shall suffer pains of death. But when a woman turned pirate, society saw something far worse. The sea had always been regarded as hostile to women. Sailors muttered superstitions that a woman aboard brought storms and mutiny. The ocean, in their minds, rejected female presence. Maritime law reflected this fear. Ships were he, but danger was she. To be a woman at sea was already to invite suspicion. To be a pirate was to embody a nightmare. Women like Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read did not step lightly into this life. They had been pushed toward it by circumstances as brutal as any storm. Mary Read spent much of her life disguised as a man, first in the army, then at sea. Her secret was survival. Anne Bonny, the illegitimate child of an Irish maid and her master, had been dressed as a boy in her youth to hide her shameful birth. Both women were marked from childhood as outsiders, and piracy offered them the one thing the world denied them, a taste of freedom, however fleeting, to their enemies. They were monsters in petticoats, women who had abandoned nature. To their comrades, they were fierce and loyal shipmates. But to the courts of the Admiralty, they were guilty before they ever opened their mouths. Justice at sea was not the same as justice on land. Pirates were not tried in ordinary courts, but in Admiralty courts, tribunals created to protect trade and empire. These courts operated in London and across the colonies, from Jamaica to Barbados, often in makeshift halls that smelled of salt, sweat, and fear. Their purpose was not to weigh evidence, but to send a message. Piracy would not be tolerated. The process was swift. There were no juries, only panels of naval officers or governors loyal to the crown. Testimonies were collected from ship captains, naval patrols, and terrified sailors who betrayed their comrades to save their own lives. The accused were brought in chains, charges read aloud in tones of righteous certainty. Defenses were rarely heard, and even more rarely believed. The verdict was nearly always the same: guilty. For women, these trials were even harsher. They were treated as spectacles of shame. Their very presence in the dock was held as evidence of their depravity. How could a woman, society asked, end up on a pirate ship unless she was already corrupt beyond redemption? The courtrooms rang not only with accusations of piracy, but with condemnations of their femininity. And yet, there was one fragile defense open to them: pregnancy. Known as pleading the belly, it was less mercy than necessity. If a woman was with child, execution was delayed until the baby was born. The unborn could not be punished for the sins of the mother. Anne Bonny and Mary Read both used this plea at their trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica, in 1720. Doctors confirmed their condition, and the court granted a reprieve. Mary Read died soon after in prison, her body consumed by fever. Anne Bonny's fate vanished into rumor. Some said her wealthy father ransomed her. Others whispered she escaped and lived quietly under another name. History offers no certainty. Others were not so fortunate. In 1729, Mary Cratchit, an American woman who joined a band of escaped convicts turned pirates, was captured near Virginia. She was tried swiftly in Williamsburg. There was no pregnancy to save her, no sympathy to temper the law. She was sentenced and executed without delay. Her name faded into the records. Another example offered to terrify. The Admiralty trials were never about fairness. They were about theater. And when women stood in the dock, they were transformed from living rebels into warnings. Their voices silenced by verdicts written long before they spoke. The most famous women of piracy remain Anne Bonny and Mary Read, whose lives have been retold in legend and ballad. Yet behind the myths are fragments of truth preserved in brittle court records. In October 1720, they stood trial alongside Calico Jack Rackham and his crew. Witnesses testified that while most of the men cowered below deck during battle, the two women fought fiercely, pistols blazing, voices cursing louder than the men themselves. Their defiance only deepened the court's outrage. When Rackham was condemned to hang, Anne Bonny's bitter words were recorded for posterity. If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog. It was not a plea for mercy, but a condemnation of cowardice, a final refusal to submit. Mary Read's story ended in prison, but her legacy lived on in whispers of a woman who had fought armies and sailed seas disguised as a man. Anne Bonny disappeared into mystery, perhaps surviving, perhaps not. But her legend grew until she became a figure of romance rather than tragedy. Mary Cratchit's tale was far darker. She was not immortalized in song, only in legal records. After escaping prison with male convicts, she turned pirate out of desperation. Captured soon after, she was tried, found guilty, and executed with cold efficiency. No crowd remembered her. No legend grew around her name. She was erased, save for the ink of the court, and yet, there were others. Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen of the 16th century, who commanded fleets and negotiated with Elizabeth I, though not of the Golden Age. Her story haunted the imaginations of later women who dreamed of the sea. There were whispers, too, of nameless women who sailed disguised, their lives lost before history could remember them. They remind us that for every Anne Bonny who became a legend, there were countless others buried in silence. If trial was theater, execution was spectacle. Pirates condemned to die were led from Newgate prison in carts, paraded through the streets of London. Crowds lined the roads, children perched on shoulders, vendors selling food and drink as if it were a festival. The condemned sat in chains, guarded by soldiers, jeered at by the mob. For women, this journey carried an extra weight of humiliation. They were stared at as curiosities, mocked for their unnatural crime, and treated as living warnings. At execution dock, the ritual reached its climax. Unlike land-based executions, where a long drop broke the neck swiftly, Admiralty hangings used the short drop. The body strangled slowly, legs kicking in what was called the marshal's dance. Sometimes it took 15 minutes for death to come. The crowd watched eagerly, some laughing, some silent, all reminded of the Empire's power. For the worst offenders, the cruelty continued. The bodies were left hanging until 3 tides washed over them, the river lapping at their feet, seagulls circling above. In cases of male captains, the corpses were sometimes tarred and gibbeted, hung in iron cages along the river as warnings. Women were spared this final indignity, but the threat itself was clear: piracy would not be forgiven, no matter the gender of the condemned. Before the noose came the lash. Many female pirates endured flogging, an ancient punishment designed to strip flesh and dignity alike. The whip cracked across their backs before assembled crowds, each stroke a reminder of authority. For women, flogging carried an added cruelty. Their bodies became public spectacles, their pain entertainment. The lash humiliated as much as it wounded, ensuring that even before death, they were broken in the eyes of society. Imagine the last mourning of a condemned woman. Chains clink as guards lead her from her cell. Outside, the streets are thick with spectators. Some stare with disgust, others with fascination. Children gape, merchants shout, and soldiers keep the mob at bay. She rides in the cart, the rope already hanging from her neck, the air filled with the smell of the river dotted Wapping. The gallows rise before her. The crowd presses closer, jeering and calling out. She mounts the scaffold, the hangman tightens the rope. There is no speech to save her, no plea the court would hear. The cart is pulled away. Her body jerks, her legs thrash. The marshal's dance begins. The crowd roars, then falls silent as her struggles fade. The tide rises, the river flows on, an empire stands affirmed. Another pirate silenced, another warning carved into memory. Though their lives were short, the stories of women pirates did not die with the rope. Anne Bonny and Mary Read became legends, transformed by time into symbols of freedom, defiance, and forbidden romance. Ballads sang of their courage, novels reinvented them as heroines, and centuries later, they became icons in popular culture. Yet the truth was far harsher. They were prisoners, beaten, mocked, condemned, their fates decided in courts where no woman's voice carried weight. Others, like Mary Critchett, were erased, remembered only in dusty records. Their suffering left no legend, only silence. The Empire preferred it that way. Legends might inspire, but silence served power. Still, something endured. In the memory of Anne Bonny's bitter words to Calico Jack, in the fragments of Mary Read's disguise, in the defiance of women who fought against a world that denied them, there remained a spark of resistance. These women, judged unnatural by law, became natural in legend, symbols of a freedom society could not entirely erase. The gallows at execution dock have long since rotted away. The crowds are gone, the shouts silenced, the marshal's dance forgotten by all but historians. Yet the lesson lingers. For the Empire, these executions were warnings. Piracy would not be forgiven, order must be upheld, and women who stepped beyond their place would suffer no less than men. But for us, centuries later, the lesson is different. We see not just criminals, but people who dared to live outside the roles forced upon them. We see courts where law was written not to protect, but to punish, and gallows where human life was sacrificed to spectacle. In the end, female pirates were reduced from legends to lessons, examples, broken to uphold empire. But in their defiance, in their refusal to bow even when the rope was at their necks, they left behind something the gallows could not take, a memory of rebellion, carried forward like the tide, whispering still across the waters of history.